So have you ever been in a situation where you have a certain way of doing something, whether it's a job, how to do it like a math problem or something, or anything that involves a procedure? Now imagine you get a new boss, teacher, or whoever fits in this scenario, and they tell you to stop doing it the way you've always been doing it and do it in a new special way. Odds are you're not going to be very receptive. Now imagine that this new technique doesn't really make things more helpful, and all it does is make people upset and more confused. This type of thing once happened across all of ancient Egypt on a mass scale, thanks to one of history's most interesting pharaohs, Akhenaten. Akhenaten decided to completely change Egypt's religious system and as a result became rather unpopular. Eventually, when he died, Egypt went back to the old ways, but they weren't keen to remember him. Akhenaten became the pharaoh that Egypt wanted to forget. So Akhenaten isn't Akhenaten's actual name. Originally, he took the throne as Amenhotep IV. The Amen part of his name is supposed to represent the Egyptian god Amun, as the name Amenhotep means Amun is satisfied. Amun is the king of the Egyptian pantheon, the equivalent of Zeus. Then sometime in the 15th century BC, he was combined with the sun god Ra to form Amun-Ra, still the head honcho, but now also controlling the entire sun, as represented by that disc on the top of his head. The disc's name is Aten. Amenhotep IV, for a mysterious reason, decided that from now on, Egyptians should worship that sun disk over Amun-Ra himself. So he changed his name to Akhenaten, which means effective of Aten. This new religion of Atenism is a puzzling one for many reasons. For example, Akhenaten only worshipped Aten, which makes one believe that this new religion was monotheistic, or worshipping one god. But as far as we know, he never officially denied the existence of the other Egyptian gods either, or actively forced others to not worship other gods. He just focused on Aten. If that's the case, then it wouldn't be monotheistic, but technically it would be henotheistic, where you recognize many gods, or don't deny other gods, but you only worship one. But then it gets a bit more confusing because there's some evidence that suggests that they tried to put Aten above the rank of god, meaning Aten isn't a god after all, but something more. It's weird, but for the sake of this video, we'll say Aten was worshipped as a god. So what does Aten do now as a god? Aten is considered the source of life, and considering what the sun does in growing plants and keeping animals and humans warm, that's not much of a stretch. When depicted, the sun rays of Aten would be handing down ankhs, which is that symbol you see with a lot of Egyptian stuff. Basically, it represents life. So it's the sun literally handing life to people and animals and so on and so forth. Now, how did the people of Egypt handle this? They weren't that happy. For one thing, ancient Egyptians had no word for religion. Like, at all. Religion was so ingrained into their lifestyle that religion and lifestyle were essentially the same thing to them. It'd be like calling waking up and eating 3 meals a day a part of your religion. Sounds redundant, right? Well, Egyptians kind of had the same attitude with their religion. So while changes did happen to ancient Egyptian religion, those would be due to either long periods of time passing by over the course of many generations, or there would be local differences between northern Egypt and southern Egypt, as the world wasn't as connected back then compared to now. But one thing that was consistent was that the pharaoh was worshipped as a god himself, which justified his absolute rule. So when Akhenaten proclaimed the worship of Aten, it was an awkward position. On the one hand, it's such a sudden change and arguably a form of heresy. But if Akhenaten is a god with whom you must absolutely obey, then do you go along with it or not? Atenism definitely got some followers for certain, but the old ways didn't exactly die off. Not to mention the priesthood of Amun didn't exactly like this change either. In fact, one theory is that the priesthood of Amun had so much power that Atenism was an attempt to remove that power from them. Either way, the priests didn't like it one bit. In fact, Akhenaten decided to build a new capital for Egypt away from the other towns that would be heavily influenced by the priesthoods. We call this new capital Amun-Ra, and also name this period of Egypt after that city. But the city was actually called Akhenaten. Yes, that name is similar to Akhenaten's name, I know. But in this city, he built a lot of temples for Aten, as you can imagine. Going back to Akhenaten himself, he was also notable for having a very weird depiction of himself. Most pharaohs, when depicting themselves, were romanticized to look stoic, strong, or idealistic. But Akhenaten would have himself, as well as his relatives, carved to look rather weird. A lot of elongated features, like in their face, elongated skulls and things like that, droopy arms. There's some theory that Akhenaten had some sort of genetic defect to make him look like that, and that the artwork was an attempt at realism. But some of of the classic Stoic type of art has survived of Akhenaten and one of his wives Nefertiti. Then of course we have several statues of him and his family with weirdly elongated skulls. Well, that's weird. Why do they have such elongated skulls? Yeah, there's a few ideas, one being the genetic defect. Considering incest was common among the royal families of Egypt, that could be an explanation. And if you think that this depiction is fake, while some of these depictions are exaggerated, we do have some skulls that show elongation compared to a normal skull. Maybe like one of the people in the royal family had it and it became associated with royalty, so others had their skulls artificially elongated to copy them, kind of like how people started wearing powdered wigs after Louis XIV did it. There are also other cultures where artificially elongated skulls did occur despite being before modern surgery, so it's not that unthinkable. Either way, Akhenaten definitely had a distinguishing style depicting himself and his family. So what happened after he died? While the worship of Aten continued, it wouldn't last very long. After a few short reigns, Tutankhaten became a young pharaoh of Egypt. His name meant living image of Aten. Naturally, being a Kheta ruler meant that a lot of people would try to influence him, and oh boy did they. The priesthood convinced him to change his name to Tutankhamun, the name that you're more familiar with, and of course the name means living image of Amun instead of Aten. Tutankhamun also moved the capital back to Thebes from Amarna, so the old ways were on their way back. 2 reigns later, we have a new pharaoh and the last one of this dynasty called Horemheb. Horemheb would be the one to officially end the worship of Aten altogether. Then under his reign, they destroyed as many Aten temples as they could. They also tried to erase as much of the Amarna period from Egypt as they could, considering it a horrible embarrassment for their history. It's kind of like de-Stalinization under Khrushchev, but way bigger. And the thing is, it actually kind of worked. When you have a very small amount of people who can read and write, not to mention history itself is not something that everyone learns about in ancient Egypt, it's very easy to control information like that. Add to the fact that life expectancy in ancient Egypt was only in the mid to late 30s if they survived childhood. It didn't take as long for generations to die off. Thankfully, they didn't destroy everything, so modern historians and archaeologists have learned about Akhenaten and his reign, but a lot of what we found were destroyed fragments or well-hidden pieces of art. The erasing of history is also why we know so little about Tutankhamun, and perhaps why his grave wasn't robbed by grave robbers, as no one would be searching for him. But this tells about how powerful history can be, and how the modern era, where we have scholarly debates about history as well as the standards of acceptance of history, is one we take for granted. Many might argue about revisionism or reinterpretations being dangerous, but it's over silly stuff like an older figure apparently having flaws is controversial. But it's nowhere near as impactful as the idea of erasing an entire dynasty from the record. It's why ancient history isn't nearly as certain compared to more modern history. Thank you for watching. Hey everyone, hope you liked the video. If you liked it, please click like and subscribe, and don't forget to use that notification bell so that way you can actually see a new video of mine when it comes out. I will see you guys next time.